So, to what extent, how did you deal with Emily when this was happening, and were you scared? Do you remember like the first moment you thought, "Well, this might not be true," and then started like the wheels started turning about what the implications might be, what the risks might be. What was that like for you? That process?
So I don't remember a specific, like the first time that I talked to Emily about it, but I mean, we've always been tight. I mean, I don't remember being, and maybe again, I'm too young and dumb to know that this could, at the time, that this could be really serious to our marriage. But I remember while we were at Bucknell, and even after we moved to Houston in 2002, trying to have these initial conversations and not really being, I didn't try to hide my concerns about the church from Emily. I think we would talk about it. Now, the more we began to talk about it, I think the more I began to realize, oh wow, this is going to be a big problem. But initially, chalk it up to naivete or just being, too young or dumb. I didn't really have trepidation initially about saying, hey, I've learned some things. Let me tell you what I've learned.
So, Emily, I'm guessing you remember when he first told you. Is that true?
Well, I don't remember the first time, but let me go back and set the stage as to what I'm doing while he's in school and being educated and his mind's blowing up. My mind is doing the opposite. I'm at home, pregnant, not going to school. I stopped going to school because we needed to make a home for this baby we were going to have. And I was scrapbooking and doing mind-numbing tasks. So when he would come home, and it wasn't, he would come home and share interesting tidbits from his philosophy class or what have you, and that was interesting. I don't remember vividly at Bucknell it being super uncomfortable for me yet. Can you remember a story at Bucknell coming out to me? I don't have a strong recollection of those.
It's a good point.
It's later.
And also during this time, and really all the way through 2015, when Emily stopped going, I was still going to church. So it wasn't as if, John, that I had said, you know what, church isn't true, I'm not going to participate. I was still going. For years, I had callings. So I was kind of muddling along while mentally, emotionally, I'd checked out. I was, like I said, convinced the church was not true. To keep the peace and to be a part of my kids' lives, I was still going. So from the outside, I mean, we'll get to it, but in 2008, I baptized my daughter because that was just the path of least resistance without a testimony of the church at all.
Let's dig a little bit deeper there. So, we don't know how many active Mormons right now don't believe but are just going along. But I imagine there are lots of reasons why people do that. You've talked a little bit about it. What is that like? Was it hard? Is it excruciating? Is it boring? Like, there are people that will want to be connected with about what they're going through. Do you remember what it's like to keep attending church after you now no longer believe it? What's that like?
It was completely miserable, completely. That I've described it to Emily before, and the way that I could best articulate it was to say it fit like going to church and maintaining a calling and kind of muddling through and pretending to still be participating and have a testimony. It feels like wearing a dress shirt that's about 3 sizes too small. And no matter how you move or no matter how you maneuver or no matter what you try, that shirt just feels uncomfortable. It doesn't fit. And that was me for years. Eventually I figured out the primary, the nursery was a good place to be. I could hand out goldfish crackers and, cut orange slices and people would more or less leave me alone. But it was, even then I was still going to sacrament meeting And, just the fact that I would attend with my family, there's the presumption, right, that Kyle must be active. Here he is on Sunday with his family. And so just, and it's just easier not to have a difficult conversation with someone you don't know well. It's easier to just kind of go with the flow. But it was miserable. I was miserable. Now, I wasn't miserable, Monday through Saturday. I was miserable during that 3-hour block, and then any type of, depending on what calling I had, any type of prep work. But it was tough.
So, Emily, do you remember when this first started to be like alarming or distressing to you? And if so, talk about that.
Yes. So after Bucknell, Kyle continued his education, went to law school in Houston, University of Houston. So we moved to Houston. And I remember the summers we would go home to Utah. That was our home, where our family was, and we would stay the summers there. Kyle would work for his dad a little bit over the summer, and I had lots of family there, and so we'd be home. There was discussion, he would share little tidbits of information to me. And basically, as those started, I would put up a wall, is the best way to describe it. I almost didn't even hear him when he would communicate concerns, whether it be about polygamy, blacks in the priesthood. And so I assumed that it would dissipate, it would go away. I would continue to direct him back to scripture reading and prayer, and maybe we could talk to a bishop about it and they would solve all of his concerns.
Maybe it was a phase.
Maybe it was a phase. I might be jumping ahead too quickly to that summer in Utah.
Take your time, though, if there's other things.
I think that's the right place.
So, yeah, it is, because that's when you were reading Mormon Enigma.
I think I was rereading it, but yeah.
Yeah, yes. So what year do you think that was?
It would have been 2003.
2003, we're home for the summer, and I have a few sisters in Utah. I had a few sisters at that time in Utah, and we had a barbecue at one of my sister's homes, and somehow we got on the discussion of Kyle's concerns with church history and Joseph Smith specifically.
I think I had either made the horrible mistake of bringing the book in the house with me, or was in a bag or something. But anyway, somehow some of Emily's sisters became alive to the notion that I was reading this book. And
they're like, "Oh, what are you reading?"
Yeah, and I don't know that I'd shared a ton with my family at that point, maybe that he was having some doubts, and I was concerned. And then, I think one of the sisters asked what it was about, and you started to share what was on your mind. And, maybe you were under the impression it was a safe environment, and you were just super excited to tell people about it. But it did not go over well. And I remember before the night was over, one sister she literally said, "We're getting a storm here in Houston."
I love it. Houston thunderstorms.
That's right.
It's going to get loud and dark in a minute. She said, I remember her saying these words to Kyle in the kitchen across the way. "Kyle, you can't change your mind. You can't change your mind. You married Emily and you told her that you would be these things. You can't change your mind." And quickly the next sister piled on. And what's funny about this, if there's anything funny, is these two sisters have left the church today. But back then, and we laugh about this with each other, so I can share this story. The next sister said, "Kyle, you are Satan."
Whoa, she went there.
Yeah. She said, "I can feel it inside, and you're telling me these things, and you're reading these things. You are," and she didn't say the devil. She said, "You are Satan.
Get thee behind me."
And so for me, I feel like we're skipping some of maybe your introduction to concerns that would have bothered me enough for that summer to, introduce it to my sisters and some of my family and to see their reactions. confirm that I was also what I was feeling, which was, this isn't okay. This is a big deal. This is threatening our eternity. We have a child now. So Jaden, our oldest, at that time would have been, she was born 2000, so three. So she would have been 3 years old. And this is a big threat to our family. And my sister's reactions confirmed that for me, that, oh my gosh, we're on scary ground here.
So let me tell you what I remember about that night. It was horrible. It was a several hour long discussion turned argument turned yelling in Emily's sister's house that I just felt.
Sorry, I'm trying to text you.
I just felt kind of, that what I was hearing from Emily, and it wasn't Emily, it was her sisters, but they were protective. They love her. I get that. But it was that, Kyle, you can't change your mind. You've committed to this, and you're a disappointment. And I remember I went to bed, after this all ended, and we were sleeping over at this sister's house, and I remember crying myself to sleep. We were home for the summer, and we were set to come back to Houston. We were in between law school years, and I was just the way that this felt and the words that were said. I was sure that Emily was not going to come back to Houston with me, and we had a 3-year-old. So I was thinking, I'm going to have to go back and start my second year of law school by myself, because Emily at that point had the full support of her family. Maybe even more than support, encouragement to cut ties. And I just remember being scared to death that night.
We have a couple listeners who are making comments. Lisa writes, I'm going through the whole family being torn apart now as well. Caleb writes, Kyle, we could have been faith journey twins. Tamara writes, thank you for sharing. It brings me hope. Tamara also writes, so sad how it tears apart families. I'm feeling this way right now. So we have over 220 listeners that are live listening, and it's resonating with a lot of people. Emily, really quickly, do you want to share, was your family talking to you? What were they saying? What was going on behind the scenes? What type of pressure were you feeling, if any?
No, other than I was validated that we were right. Like, if Kyle was going to leave and I had to leave the marriage because he chose to change his mind, then that was going to be on him. And I would be supported in leaving him because of his faith crisis. I did feel that with conversations with siblings. However, I don't think that I had the capability of having these deep conversations with my family, other than there was this threat to our marriage. So more of the emotional side, not the deep doctrinal, let's go ahead and sit down with Kyle and talk these issues out. That was never going to happen. It was, if you're going to make a move, you should make a move type thing before you go back.
Your family was saying
well,
that?
no, like we weren't sitting down making the plan to do it, but it was, or maybe in my mind, if this was the breaking time, maybe that was more in my mind, I should say. So that was the first time we talked about separation, or me potentially not going back with him. And our daughter, Jaden, we are vocal about this now. She would love to claim that she is the reason that we're still together today, because in the end there was, I couldn't imagine separating Kyle from Jaden, and I was able to push back my fears and concerns while also not knowing what else to do with my life. Like, I have a child, we're married, I've got baggage. All those thoughts were in my head to divorce, and I genuinely enjoyed and loved Kyle. I just didn't love his faith transition. I didn't love his doubting and his questioning, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed my time with him.
Right.
Otherwise, like we were connected on every other level.
Yeah. Let me do a quick coaching timeout. If you can turn the light on
lights
while
on.
that's going on. Quick coaching timeout. You know, Margie and I coach a lot of married couples. There are a lot of people going through this right now, like thousands and thousands of couples all over the world are going through this in Mormonism. And one of the factors that really makes a difference is what was the quality of the union independent of the church. Because you know, there's kind of let's just say there's a continuum, and there's people that married because they loved each other and were best friends and just really hit it off and enjoyed being together and couldn't imagine their lives without each other. And then there's people, let's just say on the opposite side of the spectrum, where it was like, oh, I'm home from my mission. Who's the first girl that I kind of dated or was attracted to? Let's get married, and we're doing this because we're both very committed to the church. And in some sense, they married the church as much or more than they married each other. And depending on where a couple falls in that continuum can oftentimes be a major contributing factor to whether the marriage survives. You know, it sounds like with you, Kyle, that you guys were lucky enough to in some ways be married to each other primarily. Does that seem right?
Yeah, I think that's great insight. Come on in. And I would agree that with Emily that we were connected. I mean, I have always felt like Emily and I have been best friends. You know, we just genuinely enjoy each other's company. And so that was always there, even when, and we'll talk about how things were when we got back to Houston. Really the only time that we would fight and argue would be over the church and over my concerns about the church. But everything else was there. I mean, I adore her. I think she adores me. So. I think we were married to each other, as you said, fortunately. And then there were the issues with the church. But I mean, it's not an understatement or an overstatement to say that when we would fight in this period of our marriage, it was over my lack of belief. And when we would, things kind of peaked that night in Utah. Fortunately, we kind of rode through that storm and went back to Houston.
You did share that with your dad. You could tell that story about.
Yeah, so that same, maybe the day after, that same summer when we were in Utah, I remember going on a bike ride up Provo Canyon. I think it was up to Vivian Park or someplace.
With Jaden in tow.
With my dad and my daughter. And I told him about this unfortunate night and what was said and how I felt. And I remember him telling me, and this was the first time I had been reassured by anybody that things might be okay. He said something like, well, Kyle, I hope Emily snaps to and kind of figures out that you're a pretty good guy and a pretty good dad, and you're going to be a good provider, and that you love her. And he said, if she figures that out, you guys are going to be okay. And I remember just thinking that meant everything to me, because that was the one, I guess he was the one person, or that was the one kind of comment where, hey, you may end up being able to overcome this. So.
And so, Emily, it sounds like you're saying having the child was a major thing that kept you from leaving Kyle.
Yeah.
Was that it, or were there other things?
Well, other than I loved him, I just couldn't wrap my mind around what to do with this information that my vision of us, you know, he was going to figure it out still, you know, I thought. I didn't know what that meant, but I don't know, what was the question again?
Yeah, like what kept you with him? What kept you from bailing?
Yeah. So my love for him, and that I couldn't envision separating Jaden from him. That felt wrong. We've told each other before, if we were just no children, that would have been an easier, well, maybe it's just better that we cut ties.
Our listener John writes, my mixed faith marriage lasted only 4 weeks. My wife came out very quickly after I read her D&C 132. She dropped the book in shock.
That was not me. It took me a lot longer.
Yeah. And that's part of why we're doing this interview. Okay. So, how did you guys progress?
So we get back to Houston, and for the next, I would say 5 or 6 years, and I've got a couple.
Oh, wait, I have one more thing.
Sure.
Heidi Nielsen Packard.
Hello, Heidi.
Who we've interviewed.
We know.
Along with Josh. She writes, Kyle and Emily, your relationship was an example to me when I thought about leaving Josh.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing.
How do you guys know Heidi and Josh?
Well, actually, we attended the 2012 Mormon Stories. First time we came to Houston, but Heidi is we first met Heidi through Kyle's sister.
Yeah, Heidi and my sister Jasmine met in, I think, San Antonio, Texas.
And they were in primary presidency together. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So, small world.
Well, thanks for helping Heidi and. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I have a couple of examples that I hope I can remember, but. We get back to Houston, and things are generally good, right? I mean, I don't want to paint the picture that we're fighting all the time. We weren't. Most of the time, I mean, we like to be together. I think we like parenting together. I think we share some of the same philosophies on parenting, and life was good most of the time, but just under the surface at all times was my lack of belief in the church. And, there would be flare-ups. So we would have discussions that would turn to argument. And of course, we couldn't resolve it. What Emily would tell me was, you need to go, I remember you saying, just, go read the Book of Mormon more or again and pray for confirmation that the church is true. And again, it's that shirt that just doesn't fit. I mean, I've read the Book of Mormon. Well, we'd have these discussions, and I'd try to explain, I've done that, and my answer isn't your answer. And
it would just end in an argument where we'd fight and go to bed without talking.
Yeah, and so my point was, we would when we'd have a flare-up or a fight, we're both fairly stubborn people, and we would go at first a day, maybe, without talking to each other, where we were both kind of, humph. And then we'd make up and things would be good. And then we'd have, but the frequency of these flare-ups about the church was growing. And the length of time where we would kind of generally ignore each other because of these disagreements over the church would get longer. So after a while, I can remember several times where we would have a pretty good argument over the church, and then we would go a full calendar week without talking to each other. And, we would talk, I guess, through the kids to each other, like at the dinner table, or we're all sitting at the dinner table, and, but we wouldn't speak to each other.
It was not a good environment for anyone. The kids involved, like hindsight, that was immature on our part, and we lacked the ability to communicate well.
Yeah. And so that was, that was happening. At the same time, I'm now through law school. I'm working at a big law firm in Houston, working a lot of hours, and, the opportunity would present itself from time to time to go have a beer after work with my colleagues. And so I would do that from time to time. And of course I wouldn't tell Emily that I'm doing this. And so I remember doing that once in a while and driving home after having a beer and stopping at the gas station to, get some potato chips and some mouth rinse to try to mask what the fact that I'd just been out with a couple of colleagues for an hour after work. And, I just remember having to try to deceive Emily that this wasn't happening. And every once in a while it was obvious and you'd find out and we'd fight about it, but it was an unhealthy environment. I mean, it's never a healthy situation in a marriage when one spouse is having to trick or deceive the other one. And the reason I did that was I felt I wouldn't be accepted by being authentic. And so it was better for me, rather than just trying to be me, to try to hide it. And that led to additional problems.
Yeah, even worse, because what's worse than not believing in the church? Well, drinking, of course.
Yeah, I mean,
and lying to me about drinking. So, I mean, those are separate issues when you're not honest with your spouse. Religion or no religion, if you're deceiving your spouse is not okay. So that was hurtful on two levels.
Yeah, and I felt awful for doing it. It was not easy, and I didn't take it lightly. I felt horrible, and it was unhealthy. I mean, in the church, we'll talk a bit about alcohol, but others may disagree. But I think if you were to rank the hierarchy of sins, you'd have murder at the top, and then you'd have adultery, number 2, and a close third would be drinking. And in the Mormon Church, there's no education it's just don't do it. And so for a lot of people in the church, there's not a difference between, having a beer and doing more. If you have a drink, you're drunk and you're an alcoholic. And neither of those were true for me, but
I certainly viewed it that
in
way.
Emily's mind, that was the case.
So just as kind of a timeout coaching moment, don't do this. Don't stop wearing your garments without telling your spouse and trying to hide it. Don't stop paying your tithing without telling your spouse. Don't start drinking or doing drugs or whatever without telling your spouse, because it's enough to feel betrayed and to feel like you've abandoned what was the foundation of their marriage. Add on top of that, them feeling lied to, it really undermines your position. But that leads me to a question, and you've talked about it a little bit. You talked about how, on the one hand, alcohol shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is. And talk about why that was so important to you to have that drink of beer, because a lot of people do. They really want to drink that beer, have a cup of coffee. And in any other context, that's completely reasonable. But it's so, it's adding a lot. And even if you do tell your spouse, and even if you are totally open with them, you're introducing additional changes and variables that that add to the distress. And so, can you guys talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just kind of felt, and again, this was occasional. This wasn't regular, a regular basis. And I'd have a lot of opportunities. I worked at a firm right downtown. There was plenty going on there's restaurants and bars, and I'd get invited, on a weekly basis to go out with a lot of times, partners that I was working for. Sometimes there was an expectation that I'd go, right? I mean, you don't want to tell this corner office partner who's just invited you out for beer, no thanks.
And then not partake.
Right. So there was some of that, but part of it was it just kind of felt natural to have an occasional beer to blow off some steam. I mean, I just kind of felt alive to do that. And so I did. I was about to say I regret the deception, and I certainly feel horrible about it, but I don't know. I was in a tough spot. I mean, because I felt like I wanted to do it. I felt like it was healthy.
And he didn't believe it was wrong.
And I didn't believe it was a sin.
He doesn't believe in the word of wisdom. Why would he abide by it? It's as simple as that.
So the reason not to do it in my worldview would obviously, I'm going to disappoint Emily, and that's huge. But I made the decision. I'm going to have an occasional beer and try to hide it and deal with the disappointment.
So how did things progress?
Well, I'm just thinking of drinking alcohol. Down the road, when I came to terms with, okay, he's just going to do it, and you tried to introduce it into like a date night meal. I remember sitting across from the table. Actually, we were in D.C. and we were celebrating out for a work event that I followed you out to D.C. for, and it was a fun part of town. And you said I'd like to order a beer. And I entertained it and said, okay. And then the beer was delivered and he started drinking it and I just lost it, right? Like I could not, it felt awful. I could not stand that he was drinking alcohol. It ruined my meal. So, and that sounds really juvenile, but that's exactly, that was my reaction. It was juvenile. And so what else can you think of on that end?
Yeah, I remember that night. I remember just the air being sucked out of the evening. I mean, we were celebrating, I think it was early on at the firm, and we were on a kind of a really nice trip to DC, and the fact that I ordered one beer, just kind of completely deflated the night and kind of ruined the rest of the night. So that was something that was continued to be a problem for us for a long time. Around the same time period, and I'm in my mind in the 2007 time period, I was going to tell the Chick-fil-A story because I think that's kind of where we are.
As far as where we're progressing to at this point. Yeah, that's about 2007.
So things are not good. The frequency of our fights are increasing. The length of time we're going when we're trying to do our best to ignore each other is expanding. And I think we were both fairly miserable people during this period. And one weekend, I don't think we planned the location, but we ended up in a Chick-fil-A parking lot, sitting in the car and talking very specifically about getting a divorce. And I remember one of the things that I said to you, and I don't know that either of us were arguing more for the divorce or less for the divorce. We were just kind of talking about
the D word.
Is this going to happen? And I remember asking you the question. I said, are we really going to end this marriage? And at the time we had our son, so we had two children. We had a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I said, are we really going to end our marriage because I don't believe Joseph Smith had the first vision and translated the Book of Mormon?
Or was a prophet of God.
Or was a prophet. And I don't remember the outcome. I mean, I don't remember your answer to that. I don't remember the outcome of that specific conversation other than we were talking now much more specifically about a divorce. But I think that had an impact on me that it shocked me into this black and white scenario. Like, it seemed pretty silly when delivered that way, that I would leave you, a great father of our kids, a good husband otherwise, other than, his disbelief, because he didn't believe in a man who doesn't even exist on the earth anymore. So I also don't remember what I said to you in the car that night. I just remember it kind of jolting me, like, this is ridiculous. No, we've tried to recall that, and we can't really. But that was my understanding. Is it was just seems
again, silly. Let's move on. Let's keep trying again.
Yeah. So we had, several pointed conversations about divorce. And again, it was all because I no longer believed. Now, remember, during this entire time, I'm still going to church. The year after this Chick-fil-A parking lot discussion, I baptized my daughter. So I'm still faking it because I didn't know what else to do. But anyway, it was a rough patch. I remember, I think either the year before or maybe it was the year after. Now it's raining. We went out for dinner on our wedding anniversary. And the reason I remember this one was Emily surprised me during the dinner by giving me a card, an anniversary card, where she told me that she was pregnant with Reese, with our youngest. And I just remember completely being surprised and thrilled and excited. So I mean, things were still there. Things were still good. I mean, we were having a great anniversary dinner. I was thrilled that Emily was pregnant. We're gonna have another baby, and great night, celebratory night. And on the drive home, it was a 5-minute drive home from the restaurant we were at. I don't know who brought it up. It was probably me, but we got on the subject of the church and some of my concerns about church history. Completely torpedoed the night. I mean, here was this celebratory night, that should go down in history as one of the greatest nights of our marriage. Emily's pregnant again. Things are good. And within 5 minutes of leaving the restaurant and driving home, we're not talking to each other. So it was dramatic, and it was like I said, the frequency of these episodes was going up.
Emily, talk about what Kyle's doubting and loss of faith did to your relationship with your Heavenly Father, to the church, to your church activity levels, and how did you respond spiritually and religiously to the situation you found yourself in?
Oh, I doubled down. It was I've got to carry us across the finish line. If anybody's going to save this, and keep our family together, I've got to do it. I've got to keep everybody going to church. I've got to keep us on the straight and narrow. It was on me. I remember asking for blessings from when we'd go home and visit family, from family members. I need a blessing to be able to survive this on my own and to help my family. Spiritually, I was constantly on my hands and knees, or my knees, praying, and in one of my darkest moments, I remember there were two ways that Kyle was going to come back to the church. This sounds so awful, but I was sure that something awful was going to happen to someone in our family, in our immediate small family. Something, I don't know, something catastrophic, some illness or sickness or accident or injury that would bring him to his knees. And somehow, it's outlandish. Hindsight, looking back, that's not the Emily I know now, but back then it was something drastic will happen and it will bring him to his knees and he will come back to the church. He will come immediately back to the church, or some male authority in the church will say the right thing to him. He will find something in the scriptures and we will go get direction. It was always someone will fix it. And I envision that as a male authority in the church and or an event.
And you were getting a bit emotional when you say an event. Did you mean like some sort of tragedy? Like you were almost, what I interpreted is you were almost hoping for some sort of tragedy or expecting some sort of tragedy to trigger. Yes,
expecting. I wouldn't say hoping. I certainly didn't want that to happen. But I also expected that that's the way the Lord would, bring him back into alignment somehow. Isn't that's awful, that's the God I believed in, but that's how true Mormonism was, that there would be something that would bring him back. I just didn't know how how his hand would play in that. Because it was so threatening to our eternity together that he wouldn't believe. So I started psychoanalyze that. I started making up these scenarios that he'd possibly come back.
For listeners who may hear some noise in the background, we're in Houston and there's a thunderstorm going on, so you'll hear thunder from time to time, which is fun, and it adds to the dramatic effect. Okay, well that's pretty intense. So you were doubling down, and
and asking God for answers. Why is this happening to me? I've done everything right. I've ticked all the boxes. I've been faithful. I've been obedient. I'm reading my scriptures. We're going back to the scenario where I was a kid, and when I did all those things, it worked out. I was happy. Life went well for me.
Yeah, you were still very much in the, I don't know what word I'm looking for, traditional mode. And what I mean by that is so we're in the 2008 time period right now. There were several points in our marriage where I would want to do something and Emily wouldn't want me to do it. And I could try to justify it or explain why I wanted to do it and why it was okay. And Emily did not want to hear it from me. But if she heard it from a male leader in the church, then I was good. It was like a hall pass. So a couple of examples.
Well, I'll give the first one, and we're going to have to go back a little bit to 2005. One of the summers we were home.
I think it might have been that same summer.
And maybe that was what played into my easing up on you that horrible summer. My mom was in a Provo ward there, and I just said we need to go visit the bishop. We didn't have our bishop there, so we went to my mom's bishop. We were staying with her that summer, and I remember this bishop, when we told him of Kyle's concerns. I don't remember how much detail we gave this bishop, but enough for him. We told him that Kyle stopped wearing his garments, and that was a problem in my mind, right? He was less spiritual. He couldn't be in tune with the Spirit without his garments. He couldn't be as close to God. Of course that was going to lead him on a trajectory farther away from Mormonism, and that bishop listened to us, and this is rare, and this, of all the bishops we've been to, this is the one that I would wish we could have continued to go to for counsel. But he said, well, if he doesn't believe it, then why would he wear them? Simple as that. And as soon as that bishop said that, I instantly gave Kyle permission not to wear his garments. In my head, it was, okay, thank you. I needed your permission. My whole life, I needed a male authority to make decisions for me.
How do you feel about that now?
Oh, the opposite. Awful. Like, no, thank you. We can get into that later, but I took the reins back. I took the.
Yeah, my lack of faith, or my faith crisis, rendered me with zero credibility on anything church related. And so, like I said, we could have these discussions, and she's gonna, your analogy of grabbing the canoe and sinking down, she's going to sink down in that canoe and stabilize it anytime I say something. But the minute a bishop or a church leader would give me or validate me in any small marginal way, then it was okay.
Yeah.
Permanently.
And that was a relief to me and to you, right? Like, that helped both of us. But
so shout out to that bishop.
Yeah, he helped us.
Bishop Sumption in Provo, Utah.
Any other, you were going to tell a couple of the stories? Or?
Oh, just a couple others in the same in the same chronology, or same, not chronology, but the same line. When we were first married, and this kind of goes to getting married quickly and you don't know everything about the other, about your spouse, but I like to watch football on Sundays. I like to watch the NFL. And Emily grew up in a home where you don't watch TV on Sundays, period. And so right off the bat, when we were married, that was a problem. We fought about it, or disagreed about it. And when we moved to Pennsylvania to go to school, we went over to dinner one of the first Sundays at the bishop's house. They had invited us over to make us feel comfortable. And wouldn't you know it, we walk into the living room and this bishop's watching, the Steelers game. And I didn't even have to say anything. Wow.
That's God.
But from that day on, I could watch football on Sundays, and that was okay.
Interesting.
I dropped it quick.
So what did being in such different places do to the quality of your marriage and relationship? How did it affect the day-to-day? So you're wearing garments, Emily, but Kyle's not. I can imagine that having implications even in the bedroom, you're feeling Kyle like almost emasculated, maybe, where you're a disappointment, and in the home she's looking to any other male authority but you. How does that describe what that does to the connection, to the intimacy of a marriage? And I don't want to say that was a struggle for you guys, but for many it would be. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I hear the question, and disagree with me, but in my mind, we did have those episodes where we'd ignore each other for a period of time after a fight. But generally speaking, I think we were able to maintain some healthy emotional intimacy, even in the face of all of this. And maybe that just speaks to the foundation or the connection. These things didn't make that easier, but I felt like generally on the day-to-day, as long as we weren't in one of those windows of ignoring each other, things were good. And we've talked about this. I have never once thought about or felt like, this is during when I was having my faith crisis and Emily was doubling down. I never felt like, when we talk about divorce, it wasn't anything I wanted. I wasn't looking for a way out. I wasn't looking to spread my wings. And I think that's because we could somehow still have that connection, and maybe we're the outlier, and I'm glad we are, but I think we were able to keep that connectivity.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that's an important point, is that I never looked at it as, does Kyle want to stay with me if I expect him to continue to be a believing member, Selfishly, that didn't enter my mind. It was, what do I want to do? Do I want to continue in this marriage? It's up to me. While all the while, he's in it to win it, and he's not going anywhere. I really didn't even entertain that he could want to leave. It was in my court, and that just shows how selfish I was at the time, that this was about me.
There can be a little bit of a believer privilege or a believer arrogance where you're almost condescending to stay with him. He's kind of lucky that that you're sticking around. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. And I would have had the support not only of my family, but I think of Kyle's family as well. They would have understood why I left, or at least
some of my family.
Some of your family.
Yeah, and that's so hard. I'm just going to jump in and do another coaching moment. This is kind of really important. I had a listener email me the other day after watching the Jolly interview. So that's Andrew Jolly and Allison. And this was a relationship that was really strained by a mixed faith marriage, and then they were able to work it through. And what he told me is, John, I just want you to make sure you understand that while I'm super happy for this couple, and you always bring on couples where there was a happy ending, and we do that to give people hope. We do that so that people know that they shouldn't give up, that there are ways through this, there are ways to be happy. There are people who don't have the foundation to be able to weather through this, either to have the marriage survive or to have the marriage survive with any positive quality. And he basically said that while, the interview, he was happy for the joy that, the happy ending for these couples, that these interviews made him feel almost sad and desperate and almost suicidal, because it sort of made him feel like he and his marriage was a failure because they couldn't make it work, and he's tried and he's lasted for years and he hasn't seen a change. So I just want to make sure, if there are those of you who might be listening, I always want you to have hope. I don't want people to give up. I want people to seek to find a therapist or a coach that can help them make things better. I want people to learn the skills necessary to weather through it. But I also want to make sure everybody knows that not every marriage is going to survive or survive in a happy way through this. And in some sense, really, Kyle and Emily are kind of in the 98th percentile for the quality of their marriage, that helped them see this through. And I just don't want anyone to feel discouraged if your marriage isn't working out, or if your marriage ended, or if you're just stuck in a really awful marriage and there's no hope in sight. Not all marriages are going to last. Not all these marriages should last. And, the best thing you can do is, learn how to navigate it effectively and get professional help through a coach or a therapist. And there are good ones. And so reach out to me, email me at drjohndolin@gmail.com. We will find you the support you need to either get the marriage back on track or to transition in a healthy way out of the marriage. Either way, we just want to create that space for people who don't have the same sort of story. Yeah.
That's awesome. That might be a good transition into, what was helpful for me, that kind of changed the tides, or at least started this new approach that I took toward Kyle and his disbelief. So this was about 2009. Two things happened. I remember a conversation with my mom about, I probably was sharing a little bit of my frustration with Kyle's disbelief with her, and she said to me, I remember her saying, well, Emily, he's a good dad and a good husband, period. And for that to come from my mom, who didn't have a good spouse, and, I did not have a good dad. Everything else was going to work out later. Like, I have goodness in Kyle. He's a good human being. And I need to focus on that more than where this all goes. And I just need to put it in God's hands. We'll figure it out in the next life, right? But he's a pretty good guy. So why am I, considering sending him downriver? So that was just an aha moment that I had with my mom. It was super powerful coming from her. And the second thing was I started training for a half marathon. And I think I asked some of our friends, for podcast or what they do to keep what music they listen to or something. And someone suggested podcasts. And so I said, well, what interests me in podcasts? And I Googled Mormonism. Mormonism interests me. And I found John DeLynne's Mormon Stories. I can't remember if Mormon Matters was also up and running then. But there was one of your first, or at least when I came into the scene, podcasts was a short 1 hour long mixed faith marriage. It didn't go very deep, but it went, it was new to me. It was fascinating to me. I was desert thirsty for anyone like me. I didn't know anyone going through what Kyle and I were going through. And that was the first time that I felt a little bit normal listening to this. It was swapped. The wife was doubting and losing her faith, and the husband was a believer. So, it eased, the pressure eased up a little bit just from those two events.
Yeah, bless your mom. And as kind of a coaching moment, I don't know how many Orthodox believers listen to Mormon Stories. I know there are some, but maybe some of you who are going through a faith crisis can at least forward to that part that Emily just shared. Orthodox family members need to understand that they can railroad a marriage. They can end a marriage by not being loving and supportive, and by undermining the intimacy and the connection between the believing spouse and the unbelieving spouse. And I just can't fathom a true religion where the God of that religion would prefer to see a healthy couple separate and divorce and children be thrown into a fractured family just because one lost their faith. Regardless of what faith you choose in the world, the vast majority of the world isn't of that faith. And if God is the Father, if Heavenly Mother is the mother of all the children on earth, then it can't be that the religious denomination that anyone joins or is devout to or leaves should be the determining factor in a successful marriage. And so, bless your mom for giving you that support, and for anyone who's listening who's in a position to influence their believing child or sibling or parent or whatever, go with the family, side with the family. And I love side with the union. And I love what you said about your theology. What was transformative for you, Emily, was to become more flexible in how you view your theology. That yes, eternal marriage, was what you were hoping for. Yes, that's the ideal from an Orthodox perspective of what Heavenly Father wants. But eternity's a long time, and it's okay to put it in God's hands, Heavenly Father's hands, if you're a believer, and just say, you know what, I don't know what this is going to be like. I don't know how it ends. What I know is I have this life right now. And what I know is that we have these children right now. And I know that I'm going to love my partner, not just tolerate them, not just stick with them, but cherish them and celebrate them. And we're going to give our children the best model that we can for a healthy union. What's the best thing you can give your children? I'll tell you, it's a healthy, happy, thriving relationship with your spouse if you're married. That's the best gift you can give your kids. That's more important than giving them the example of orthodoxy, because they're going to have a partner someday. And you know what? With all the people leaving the church these days, chances are one or both of you will lose your faith at some point. And so mixed faith marriage could be a huge gift to a relationship, to children, because you're going to model what is likely going to be their inevitable, outcome. I've read something to the effect of 60 to 80% of all marriages are mixed faith at this point, and they're growing. And so in so many ways, modeling a healthy mixed faith marriage is one of the best gifts you could ever give your children. You guys were looking at each other when I was saying that. Were you thinking something, or?
Lots of things that we agree. That's one of my quotes. That's how I want to end the podcast. In fact.
No, we'll bring that in. Okay.